Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. I hope everybody's having a beautiful day. I hope the sun is shining. I hope the birds are singing. And I hope the wind is at your back. I have with me returning guest, the one and only Garyth Moxey. It's an honor and a privilege to reintroduce him back to our show today. A luminary in the field of entheogen prevention and harm reduction advocacy based in Vancouver, British Columbia. Garyth stands at the forefront of psychedelic therapy, armed with a profound commitment to education, healing, and transformation. His journey is one of relentless dedication and growth. Trained as a psychedelic therapist at the prestigious Synthesis Institute, he has become a beacon of hope for many, specializing in the application of Ibogaine for addiction detoxification, particularly for opiate addiction. His expertise extends to the realms of 5-MeO-DMT and Psilocybin, substances he employs to facilitate deep psychospiritual exploration. With decades of experience and rigorous training, including certifications from the Orenda Institute and the F.I.V.E. education program at Tandava Retreats in Mexico, Garyth is a master at guiding individuals to transformative journeys of self-discovery and spiritual awakening. His work transcends the clinical. It is deeply rooted in advocacy and awareness, raising within the psychedelic community. Garyth has been instrumental in documentary projects like Dosed, which illuminate the profound healing potential of psychedelic medicine. Beyond his psychedelic therapy work, Garyth is also a passionate advocate for medical cannabis, producing high-grade cannabis oil tailored to the specific needs of his clients. His extensive knowledge of cultivation and extraction techniques ensures the highest quality medicinal products. Garyth, thank you so much for being here today. I hope the world is treating you well, and I'm looking forward to an amazing conversation. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me back. Thank you for that wonderful introduction.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm really thankful to get to talk to you, and I feel like our first conversation went by so quickly that we only got to touch on the surface area, and I just wanted to have you back and get into some of the things we were talking about. And for those that are just tuning in right now, you and I were having a really fascinating pre-chat about Ibogaine. And I thought we could kind of launch right there a little. There's some things people don't know about it. You're working extensively with it, and you've been doing it for quite some time. And maybe I could just drop that right there in front of you and let you run with it.
Yeah. So Ibogaine, I'm going into my 13th year now of working with Ibogaine. When I first started working with it, I was kind of trained in the more traditional way of working with Ibogaine, which is kind of people come in, they do a test dose of 100 milligrams or so. People check then if there's been any adverse reactions, and if everything's fine, there's been no allergic reactions or anything, then we would just dump a whole lot more into somebody, and that would be the flood dose, which could be anywhere up to about 36 hours before anybody has any sleep. And that was some years ago now. So and the whole situation has changed. When I first started getting into this game, it was all heroin. And now there isn't any heroin, or not here anyhow. I know that there is in Europe and stuff. They haven't really been hit with the whole fentanyl crisis like we have on the, in Canada and the US. So the game has kind of changed a little bit. Fentanyl now is a very ferocious opioid, much stronger than something like heroin, and due to the drug war, we are finding ourselves in a situation of now, the narcotic supply has been tainted with fentanyl and other fentanyl analogs. And now there's even other analogs that are coming in which are even stronger than fentanyl. So, it's kind of, it's a very bad situation. And it's been brought about because a lot of this fentanyl can be mailed to the States or to Canada. And that's how we first started experiencing it, was, I think, in 2008, was it? No, hang on. No, so 2012, they took the Oxycontin off the market, or the Oxy 80, and then replaced it with the Oxy Neo, which is still an Oxy 80 tablet, but you can't get at the oxycodone very easily inside. To, you know, people used to crush them up and snort them, or inject them and stuff. And with this, the Oxy 80, there's a coating that goes around the outside, which then made that very difficult to do. So, of course, the black market is going to step in immediately and started making these Oxy 80 knockoffs, which are actually fentanyl, 1 milligram of fentanyl or something like that in each pill. And so that was, of course, if you ban something, then it's going to be replaced by something else, right? So now that has made the whole situation much, much worse. Fentanyl has a much shorter half-life than heroin, so that means that the effects of it don't last anywhere near as long. And so it means that people are going into withdrawal very quickly. So that means that they have to reuse or re-up on a constant basis. So, you know, if a drug war was put into place to keep people safe, then it's failed miserably. I'm fiercely anti-drug war because, I mean, you know, people are like, well, if there wasn't a drug war, then it would be a free-for-all. It already is a free-for-all. You know, there's heroin, or sorry, narcotics on most street corners of, or a lot of street corners of big cities. And it already is that kind of free-for-all. I mean, our overdose deaths now, I think in BC we get like 8 a day.
Wow.
A day, just in BC, and 4 in Vancouver. And those are the people that actually, you know, pass away. Many of them being in, you know, a Starbucks bathroom or something like that. So the drug war has actually made things much, much worse. And it's in the hands of criminals, you know. So, and it doesn't look like it's going to be getting any better. And so, you know, which is affecting people worldwide. Now, things have changed a little bit for us here in Vancouver. It used to be people would get onto Suboxone or methadone, but now we're just trying to keep people alive here. And so some of the, we've got rapid access addiction clinics where people can go and get put on, they can get hydromorph, which is a strong narcotic, and also time-release morphine. So if people are coming to us and they're using street drugs here in Vancouver, then, you know, we can't really work with them with the street drug situation. But if they can go to the rapid access addiction clinic, then people can get on an alternative opioid supply, and then we can start moving towards possibly doing a treatment with people. You know, but the whole situation has changed much, you know, compared to how it used to be. People used to be able to show up on the door, you know, on heroin, and we could work with them. But now things are a lot different. You know, the drug supply has been very badly tainted with fentanyl. And if that wasn't bad enough, over COVID, illicit benzodiazepines started getting into the street supply as well, which makes overdose so much more likely to happen when you're mixing benzodiazepines with opiates. And then Ibogaine doesn't work for benzodiazepines as well. So, you know, our pool of people that we can work with has just gotten smaller and smaller. You know, we find ourselves now working with not so many people that are using street drugs, but more housewives that have become addicted to Oxycontin or Percocet or something like that, or some other kind of opioid, you know, that might be prescribed by the doctor. You know, and we do work with some people that are using street drugs, but they've got to be able to jump through our hoops before we can start working with them, you know. And then also, apart from that, there's got to be a good treatment plan. You know, we don't just treat people if they're just going to be, you know, like Ibogaine should be used as a tool, and it's not just. It's always been kind of banded around as a bit of a magic pill, and I'm not trying to downplay its efficacy, because there is nothing else for addiction like Ibogaine, but. yeah, it's become complicated, a lot more complicated, and it's important that people use it as a tool within a plan, a bigger picture plan that that they're going to use for their recovery, not just like, oh, I'm living on the streets, my family's going to pay for a treatment, and then life's going to be rosy afterwards, because that's not really how it works. The whole Ibogaine thing is a process, and having some support is crucial for that process. So yeah, things are definitely a bit more complicated. Our client at the moment is going to Inscape, and our last client is at Inscape at the moment. And Inscape is a recovery place down in Mexico.
Right.
That more of a holistic approach, and they also do plant medicine there, which could help people be on the right track before they leave and then go back into their lives, how that's going to look. But the more support you can have around these kind of treatments, the better.
Yeah, it seems interesting the way in which the drug war, the actual drugs coming in, have changed the landscape of addiction. And it seems to me that what you were doing is you have had to change your methodology in treatment. When we first began the conversation, you were talking about an individual who's on a program, and sometimes it's 6 days, sometimes it's more days, and it's getting the medicine into them. And I'm wondering if you could share sort of your methodology with people so they can understand what something of that is like.
Yeah. Well, we've got somebody in at the moment, and he actually managed to come off of. He was on a lot of different drugs and antidepressants and stuff before he came in. He's somebody that's been in and out of treatment a lot of times. So he actually he was on some replacement therapy, but was also had been using crack and crystal meth. He managed to go and detox in the country in Virginia, and so he wasn't actively using any drugs when he came in. That didn't really change too much on the way that we're going to work with him. He came in and we gave him a smaller dose, so as I can see how the medicine is working with him, how that's going to affect his physiology. The blood pressure and heart rate can drop as many as 20 points when we're working in higher dose Ibogaine. So I get a bit of an insight as to how his body's going to receive the medicine, and also as a bit of a primer for his body to have a bit of that medicine run through him. So when I'm doing a higher dose, the body's not going, what is this? Get it out, There can be a lot of purging with Ibogaine, but that's normally due to motion sickness. So, and the body, having a little bit of it run through it before, so it's not kind of rejecting it in some way. And so then the next day, my nurse came and flew over from Vancouver Island, and then we started the procedure of a flood dose, which was up to about, I think, 12 milligrams per kilogram or something like that. Yeah, roughly around there. And so that's an experience for him. He didn't sleep that night. It goes round into the next day. That's a bit of a gray day for people when they have taken a higher dose. They feel a little bit blah. But he got some sleep that next night, and then the next day, we just start up with Ibogaine again. And I've seen just over the years, the amount of Ibogaine you get into people makes a huge difference. So he's with us for another 6 days or something like that, and he will be taking Ibogaine another 4 of those days. So was it Sunday he took Ibogaine, and Monday, and today, and tomorrow I think he's got off. So basically he's taking a lot of Ibogaine while he's with us. And that's working more on a saturation model instead of just the flood dose model. So he's laid out downstairs at the moment. now he's had higher dose go through him, and these are smaller doses. He doesn't need to be monitored in quite the same way. So he's got some meditation music going downstairs. He's got his eye mask on, and he's fallen asleep actually, which for some people isn't unusual. But we will be doing this now until he leaves on Monday. So we'll be doing this up until Friday or Saturday. And then we'll work with him with 5-MeO DMT at the very end. And that kind of ties everything together. There's a synergy that happens with Ibogaine and 5-MeO DMT, which is, why a lot of places in Mexico are also working with 5-MeO. So that can bring in, working with the Ibogaine can be a little dark. Shadow material might arise. It's just not easy taking this medicine. But I explain to people, the more that they take, the better they're going to feel on the other side. And I've seen that, and a problem that they're having in Mexico at the moment, because people's doses are so high with the fentanyl. So when people are actually going through with these flood doses and stuff, they might feel good for the first little bit. But if they don't have enough Ibogaine in their system, they're not going to feel good in a couple of weeks. And we just had this with somebody that was going to come work with us. And he got attached to this high dose, flood dose thing. It's going to do it all for him. And then normally when we're working with opiates as well, we do a lot of low dose and repeated dosing. So as we're saturating somebody's body, so as they don't find themselves in that situation a couple of weeks later, starting to drag their feet. So this young guy, he'd gone to Mexico to one of these more established places that have a very good PR team and stuff. And they'd even posted, on their website, look at so-and-so, he was on dope last week and now he's all great, But that didn't last. And now he's back in Canada and been put on some other medication because he's experiencing some post-acute withdrawal syndrome. So, this is a problem that the Ibogaine world is experiencing. And I feel that the previous model that everybody worked on, and they worked on that model because, that's how Howard Lotsof discovered it in 1962. And then, a lot of us that provide were, drug addicted ourselves. And so then we did it that way. Therefore, it must be done that way. And that's just a kind of, a thing that's kind of, we found ourselves in the Ibogaine world. But I was just talking to somebody the other day. He's been doing, working in that more traditional way down in Mexico. And he's just saying, we're just not getting the same results that we used to get. And my answer to that is, you just got to keep them for another week and keep on giving them Ibogaine. Because then there's more Ibogaine in the system that's floating around. That's what's working, not just the flood dose, So
maybe you could break that down for people. Like how do they get the Ibogaine in their body? Like what's that process?
Well, it metabolizes. So Ibogaine metabolizes in the system into Ibogaine.
Right.
And then that's what floats around in the system afterwards and kind of leaks out into the body and brain. So,
is there a half-life on that? Like, how long does that stay in the body? Do we know?
A long time. Well, I'm not exactly sure of that. I know that myself, and what I see with people is that what I like to get out of people is like a 3-month period.
Okay.
And I find that if you get lots and lots of Ibogaine into people, then that's the kind of timeline that you're looking at. And that the neuroplasticity, which often takes up to 3 months anyhow for that, for new pathways to form. And so particularly with the Ibogaine, if you've got a lot into somebody, and of course they're going back to a good supportive situation, then that's kind of what we get from people. I no longer have people moaning about not having enough Ibogaine on board, and and pretty much we used to do that anyhow. We used to spend a lot of time. People would come for at least 10 days, and then since I started doing Inner Realms, it's at least 2 weeks for an opiate detox anyhow. So yeah, it's about repetitive Ibogaine, and a lot of places. I spoke to a guy the other day. He was in Mexico for 4 days, for his flood dose, and that was it. 4 days he was at that place, and then they kicked him out. Now, had he, had a little Percocet problem, then that might have been sufficient. Probably would have been sufficient, but he didn't. He had a fentanyl problem, and then he was able to find enough OxyContin to. It was costing him a lot, and there was an awful lot of OxyContin, but he managed to stay on OxyContin for a while before going down. But then they did this quick treatment with him, and he went home. And then he said after 10 days of not sleeping, he went out and got some oxy. So now he's back on, he's opiate dependent again. And that's really just because he just didn't receive enough Ibogaine.
Yeah.
So it's changing the game, and it's the drug war.
Yeah.
This stuff, we haven't come across it yet, but like Trank and stuff, which is going in a lot more on the East Coast. There's these different animal tranquilizers that are ending up in the dope, and which is giving people all kinds of open sores, and so it's just, and people didn't want those drugs; they wanted heroin,
right?
And heroin's much easier to deal with, but not as profitable to drug dealers. And as long as we live in a capitalist society, you can't keep hard drugs out of high security prisons. How are you supposed to keep hard drugs off the streets? So, the authorities are addicted to prohibition.
Sure. Private prisons, all of it. It's all part of it.
It's just a huge mess, So they're the society's response to this, and the drug war basically is humanity's self-inflicted open wound, So we're dealing with it in the wrong ways, and it's costing a fortune as well. If you think about somebody in runaway addiction that's out on the street, like what's that costing in theft, sexually transmitted diseases, the list goes on and on, hospital visits, incarceration. Somebody could be out there for 20 years,
right?
Costing society an awful amount. We've been going through this thing. We decriminalized drugs up here as well in BC, and now there's a backlash against that. And nobody is concerned about people using drugs at home, but what they don't like to see is the homeless people using drugs in public. And that's upsetting them. Well, give them a fucking home. If you don't want to see people using drugs in public, and that's the reason why they're using drugs in public, is because they don't have a home. So they're always trying to take their tents away from them and closing down their tent cities and stuff. And it's like the new population to hate on. When I see there's these different YouTube channels and stuff which are just poverty porn, really,
right?
And there's some guy walks around downtown, filming people doing drugs and being in a very vulnerable position. Well, that's clicks, and then that's money for his YouTube channel, and then when I see the comments that people put in, it's just shocking to me how, it's just the new people to hate on. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's on some level, I think mental illness is contagious in a way, in that when someone has a problem and we don't help them fix it, like it weighs on us. Like we become sort of disabled in a way to deal with that situation. Like everybody's like, most people I know have been around a situation like my niece overdosed on fentanyl. Like I've seen the tears of disaster flowing down my sister's face and understand what it's like to lose people. And like that is contagious. It doesn't end with someone dying, because now the entire family is injured. And some people deal with that by blaming the other people out there. But it's all of our problems. Like every one of us, it's part of us that's dying, and you can see it in the streets. And people don't know how to deal with it, and the authorities just try to blanket it over, or worse yet, they turn it into some sort of a conveyor belt for profit. They profit off the idea of addiction. Hey, here's this new company that's going to help, but they're just going to soak the money out of it and not really give anybody any help. It's a disaster, man.
Not much is being done up here as well. I mean, it was supposed to have been that the profits from the cannabis industry, was a lot of that was supposed to be funneled into people in recovery. And we do have safe supply up here, which some people are trying to get rid of, which is just going to be a death sentence to some people. But that's the levels of compassion. And then the right are always saying, "Oh, you're just in." The right are saying, "Oh, by having a safe injection place, you're encouraging drug use." No, people are going to be doing that anyhow. We're just trying to keep societies safer, from disease, and keep people alive, because people are going to be doing that. Nobody's ever died in Insight, which is a Vancouver's safe injection place. We have other ones, but they're not federally recognized the same way that Insight is. Nobody's ever died there. And yet people are dying. We're losing 8 people a day across the province, and yet the right seem to say, "Oh, you're encouraging drug use." No, not. We're just trying to keep people alive, and we've got overdose prevention sites dotted all around down in the downtown east side, in alleyways and stuff like that. Because if there's a queue to get into Insight, the safe injection place, well, somebody's going to go out in the alley back, because they're just trying to get well, and that's where people are dying, So
it's such it's both heartbreaking and heartwarming to see some of the success stories and the failures of individuals' battles in there. But it does seem to me to be like a symptom of the sickness of our society. Are you aware of any sort of like programs that you see that are addressing the bigger issues? Maybe it's the wealth inequality, or do you have any thoughts on what could be the major symptom that's one of the symptoms that's causing this breakdown?
I think wealth inequality is a big one, because it's very difficult for just anybody on a low income to be housed, and then so if you've got the slightest bit of a drug problem, boom, housing's one of the first things that goes, and that's we're experiencing a huge housing crisis here anyhow, and that's people that aren't drug addicted. We've got tent camps and RV camps and stuff, and it's not just happening here; it's happening everywhere. So I think that's a big driver. And then, of course, if you don't have security of a home, well, fuck, I'd be using drugs as well. You know what I mean? So, and as a society, we don't really seem to give a shit. Generally speaking, people are putting the rents up because that's what's happening. The rents are going up. So. Yeah, it's not a good situation, and I don't really see it getting any better very quickly either. They don't seem to be doing a whole lot of public housing here or anything, or if they are, then they're very late in getting stuff together. So that's one of the bigger problems, and then the tainted drug supply. So.
It's mind-blowing to me. It makes me think of the idea of relationships, the way we treat ourselves in our own mental dialogue or our inner dialogue. Sometimes that, I realize what it's like to have a series of negative patterns repeat in my mind, and know what that does to me and my family and my relationships. And it seems that that is something that echoes outwards into society, where we take those negative thought patterns and we just apply them to people that are less than, for some reason, whatever reason we make up in our mind. Okay, these are the people I'm going to just dump all my hate on because I can't do it to my family, but on the topic of relationships, I think that's maybe one reason we're seeing things like Ibogaine and this sort of, turn towards conscious awareness make big changes, is that these altered states of consciousness reshape our perception of relationships, and it helps us. So the question I have for you is, in your opinion, how do altered states of consciousness reshape our perception of relationships and the way we connect on a soul level?
Good question.
Yes, thank you.
I guess depends on which substances, Well, I guess with the psychedelics, it takes us away from our normal 2.0 kind of thought way of thinking, and can really shake things up for some people. I was supposed to have become a dairy farm manager or something or other, and then I took psilocybin, a large dose of psilocybin, and that clearly wasn't going to happen anymore. So maybe it affects us in a way of thinking about our relationships and what have you. Also, depending which substances, I think the whole MDMA thing. Obviously young people want to take MDMA because they're connecting with each other on ways that they never did before. So and so I guess in a lot of ways it might make people think more about their relationships with others, but feel of the importance of it. I feel that a lot of people are very disconnected these days with our phones and social media and stuff, and even in some ways we're connected through that. Like, I'm connected to a whole bunch of friends that I was involved with years ago, because there's that connectedness. But people are kind of stuck on these things, phones, and so there's a disconnection there. I don't know, but I think that we yearn for that kind of connection and communitas, but we don't have so much of it anymore, it would seem. I don't know. We're a little bit older, so we grew up in a time of not having our phones and things. So I'm quite happy to be as old as I am, and to have had to use my own mind as a youngster for entertainment. Which when I think about how we did things as kids and now how kids do things today, I mean it's quite different. So I'm not sure. I mean, as the human spirit yearns for connection.
That's well said.
And I think that sometimes these medicines can bring us together in community. I feel that if people are going to ayahuasca circles, it's not just about the ayahuasca, it's also about the community that they're being a part of, or in recovery. That connection thing is important, because I think one of the biggest things, takeaways that people get from recovery movements is the connectedness. That's kind of what I got out of going to the rooms to AA, was not being isolated at home or when I was using, that's where people end up in total isolation normally, when they're engaged with substance, and it's getting away from that and getting back to community and relationship.
I do. I hear sometimes people say that getting to hear someone's story from their lips that is near identical to your story is this an incredible way in which you realize you're bigger than yourself, that you're part of a community, that you're not alone for the first time. And
Right.
that maybe that's where some of that community comes along. Maybe for guys our age, it was playing wiffle ball out on the street until the lights came on,
Yeah.
or,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
for some people who may not have had that, the isolation factor that's happening right now, people are siloed in their houses. We went through COVID, which was very isolating for a lot of people. And when you
Yes.
have
Yeah.
the internet, that isolation can be a real banger, man.
Yeah. 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 And we're not supposed to live like that.
No,
Throughout
no.
our history, our human history, we've
Right.
pretty much always been, with our tribe, our community in some way, form, whether that be the church or,
Yeah.
there's always some kind of community. So,
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot more isolation now. Individual isolation.
Yeah.
The individualism that people are experiencing. But that whole isolation around that, and modern technology as well. I see it
Yeah.
in our relationships.
Yep.
Sometimes my partner and I, we might be in different rooms sending each other memes from Instagram, or cute dog stuff, puppy stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
you know.
It's
So we're
interesting.
communicating, but individually we're sitting in front of our death scroll devices, and not, really being part of something
Yeah.
as such.
I
And then
agree.
kids are being born into that, and it's like, it's almost they're born with a device in their hand,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they know how to use these devices, back to front. And if ever I have a problem on my phone, I just hand it to a younger person, say, "Can you fix this?" And they go, "Yep."
Right.
A split second.
Yeah. I think that also speaks to the idea of isolation between generations. If I'm almost 50 and I know that my daughter knows more about certain types of technology than I do. Like, she's going to a cool school where they're learning how to create different things and different apps and stuff like this. And
Uh-huh.
it's mind blowing to think about the chasm between her and I's idea
Yeah.
about technology. And then if you factor in a boomer versus like a Zoomer, like that's a giant chasm, and that's isolating in itself. There's no longer the
Sure.
elders able to pass down information that a young person really finds worthwhile, and that can lead to some anger down the road, I think.
Yeah. Or what is AI going to do? AI could put an end to a lot of people's professions.
Yeah, I think
Then
it
what's going to
has
happen?
to.
What's going to happen then? People don't have a way of, making an income. It's going to change the job situation. Surely.
Yeah.
You know.
I think it's a tale of two cities. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times.
Right. Well, let's not try and get too doom and gloomy.
Let me bring it back to Clint Kyles. He's got a question here.
Yes.
First off, Clint, the Psychedelic Christian Podcast, great podcast. Clint, thanks for hanging out with us. He says that I recognize that such situations are often case and individual dependent. But do you have any advice regarding the balance of compassion and tough love for those trying to help loved ones struggling with addiction, opiate addiction in particular?
That's a hard one.
It is.
I don't find tough love to really be love. Somehow, I mean, it's a way of dealing with a situation where you're going to cut somebody off or something like that. That's a difficult one because it is on an individual basis.
Right.
It's difficult to support people in some regards when they're in full-blown opioid addiction. But of course, the more support that we can give within reason, then we should. But again, it's a very difficult situation. I don't particularly know how to answer that one. I just I just haven't found tough love to really, it doesn't really cut it, and it's it's not really love in some ways. It's just kind of that. I think we're seeing less and less of that these days because I think people realize it's not really helping too much. But I do understand that the situation can be very difficult for family members and stuff when somebody's in opioid addiction, because it affects everybody. It's not just the person that's going through it, you know. So
Yeah. I think we could define that. I think we could define tough love if we defined it better on some
yeah,
level. You know, it's sort of a big idea, but it seems to me the foundation of tough love is someone who has enough belief in the person they're trying to care about that they can figure it out, you know, and it's almost ingrained in our society when you look at the hero's journey or the prodigal son or a lot of these myths where, like, listen, you can do it, or the rebellious
yeah,
teenager, oh yeah, you think you know, go show me then, you know.
yeah,
So this idea, it's and maybe it's the rugged individualism that we talk about sometimes, and but I guess I think it just depends on how we define it, you know, because there are
yeah,
success stories about it, but and on some level I think maybe we run into the problem of language, because
yeah.
is what part, how much of support is enabling, you know, those are two different things, but they seem to
Sure.
kind of run together a little bit. What's your
Yeah,
thoughts on that?
sure. No, no, I understand. Yeah, and you're right. You know, you don't want to enable somebody, but at the
Right,
same time, you don't want to shut the door on them for
right,
their
agreed,
basic needs. You
right,
know, but it can also be a very difficult situation. You know, somebody that's in truly out of control opioid addiction. You know,
yeah,
that can be a very scary thing and burns families down to the ground.
yes,
You know, so yeah, it's a
yeah,
yeah, yeah. Boundaries, yeah. Of course, having good boundaries, but again, it's an individual thing, you know, from one person to the other, and I really don't have a good answer for that one,
yeah,
Clint. I'm afraid.
yeah, it's a
You
good
know,
question, Clint. Thanks for bringing
yeah,
it in there.
yeah.
uh, have you found in your travels that there are a lot of similarities with addiction, or are there cultural sort of traps that people fall into that bring them into addiction?
Yeah, cultural ones, sure. Like, you know, alcohol in Europe.
Mm,
You know, like in the UK, alcohol is kind of a cultural obligation.
right,
And I think, you know, in Russia, I think alcohol use disorder is the number one killer of men over 45 or something like that.
right.
Liver disease, you know, which is being promoted by the state because
Wow.
it's, you know, I think they probably have a monopoly on because it's a communist country, they have a monopoly on the alcohol that's killing their population.
Ye-
It's crazy,
It
but
is
you know,
crazy.
and then that's a cultural thing that's
Yep.
just been passed down, and yeah. Well, you know, addiction. I think cigarettes and alcohol kill way more people than
Yeah.
illicit drugs do. So, you know, and that's a cultural thing, isn't it?
It is a
So,
cultural thing.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
There seems to be a thread, though, that whoever controls the drugs that fuel a society tend to be the people in charge. You know, like
Well, that's where the money lies, isn't it? In drugs and oil and war.
right, right.
You know, and there's some money in illicit drugs, but not really compared
Table
to
scraps.
pharmaceutical. Do you know what I mean? Like, you
Yeah.
know, look at Purdue, and OxyContin is
The
still,
Sackler family alone.
yeah, is still OxyContin is still $80 or $1 a milligram, I believe. So an Oxy 20 costs $20. An Oxy 80, if you can get hold of one, costs $80. And so that's $1 a milligram. That's much more than any illicit drugs.
Or gold for that matter, I think.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So it's, you know, it's kind of crazy. Um, yeah, and then you know, there's so many people on pharmaceuticals now, and why is that? You know, a lot of people are on antidepressants. Huge number of people are on antidepressants. Is that people are depressed? They're anxious. You know.
Maybe they're victim to a incredibly successful marketing campaign.
Yeah, there's that as well. There is that. Yeah,
Right?
I think they can. I don't think they can advertise antidepressants here in Canada. No, we don't watch TV anyhow, but I seem to
Right.
remember in the States
States in New
Yeah,
Zealand, I think.
Abilify and all. I remember seeing the ads and thinking,
Yeah.
holy shit. They don't seem to work for people. They might work a little bit for a short period of time for a certain percentage of the population, and then they're very difficult to get off of
Yeah.
afterwards. Can cause all kinds of problems, and then they cause all kinds of problems when people are on them as well.
Right.
Weight gain, sexual dysfunction, all of that kind of stuff. But they dish it out like smarties. I've had doctors trying to put me on various antidepressants for ADHD.
Yeah.
So, but I won't take those. So
I'm hopeful that, like, it seems to me on some level that's what this sort of wave of plant medicine means to me is this idea that we can awaken to a new fuel, a new way to see ourselves, a new opportunity to heal ourselves. And each one has now the opportunity to go and help out the next person. When you make it to the top, reach around and help the next one up. Because all of us seem to have faced something in our life. And if we can confront that thing that we faced, figure it out, and then just tell someone, then we become the bridge to helping them on some level, and instead of turning to the alcohol or the
Well,
companies.
and I think that's happening slowly.
Me too.
But the thing with the psychedelics is the people doing the work,
Yeah.
otherwise
Yes.
it's back to, it's just another peak
Fantasy.
experience that
Yep.
we've had. And, I was given all of these great insights, but I didn't really implement them afterwards. So therefore, I'm going to go back to this peak experience in another 3 months and have another one, and get a lot of really good downloads and information, and not implement them either. so that's something we see quite a bit in the psychedelic world, I think. So of course, but that's, and I think more and more people are getting wise to the fact that, oh yeah, I should probably integrate this experience better than I have been. There's been more emphasis in the last few years about people actually doing the work.
Yeah.
I mean, occasionally, people have a psychedelic experience and knock it out of the park and totally just seem to change their lives effortlessly. But for the most of us, it's like you're given some information, and then you have to act on that afterwards, and that's kind of where the work comes in. And yeah, well, Rome wasn't built in a day, so. But I see that there is quite a lot of that going on in the psychedelic community, is that people repeatedly go back for peak experiences and they don't integrate them properly, and then they're just going back for peak experiences, which in some respects is a little bit like going to watch a really cool movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, time to go to the cinema again.
Hopefully, after watching that movie enough, you can quote it though. You know what I mean? And then, like, at least then, like, you start pretending, oh, I remember John Wick over here. He did this one thing. It seeps into your life a little bit, maybe.
Yeah. But he started doing those cool moves because he started doing meditation.
Do you see this particular wave as a building block? Like, we probably couldn't have had this wave unless we had the last wave. And is that something that you see?
I know, and it's interesting to see where it's going to go. Where is it going to go from here? AI might have
huge implications.
Do you know what I mean? AI might be creating new drugs for us.
Yes.
That we wouldn't have been able to come up with on our own. So it's interesting to see how this will unfold. And yeah, it's an odd place, because there was this huge, like, there was suddenly all of this money for investment for psychedelics, and that lasted not very long, and now there isn't any money for it. Do you know what I mean? So it was a bit of a flash in the pan, but and I don't know how far we've gotten as well, because at the moment, really, the only thing that's available has been ketamine.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Which is a dissociative anesthetic.
Yeah.
That just got used on cross label. So, there's a little bit more going on, I guess, with psilocybin. And psilocybin managed to make some moves, because nobody from the medical world knew what it was. You know, if they tried to do that with LSD, it wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
You know, things are moving as well. Like we've got a lot of mushroom dispensaries now in
Yep.
Vancouver and in other places, mushrooms and online and stuff.
Yep.
So again, that's not really coming from the medical establishment. That's coming from the underground.
Yep.
So, and like 5 years ago, we were thinking, oh yeah, this new wave is happening, you know. And I remember some of the conversations that when I was doing my synthesis course, some of the conversations that were happening, and that everybody thinking that, you know, that it was going to be adapted by the mainstream the society, where it wasn't really. I mean, like the two Dosed movies, talking to the filmmakers, they're always like, you know what, we could have made more if we'd made two movies about literally anything other than psychedelics. You know, because it's still quite kind of a niche
Yeah.
thing. A lot of us that are involved were involved anyhow. We've just been given a little bit more certain amount of respectability, maybe, or something or other. So, yeah, it's interesting to see where this will go and how much will build upon on top of this. I still think that there's still quite a bit of stigma,
Yeah.
you know, attached to psychedelics, and the powers that be have done a very good job of that. You know, I still people say that LSD will change your chromosomes or some bullshit like that. Yeah, I mean, things are moving along, but then the FDA just shut down.
The Lycos. Yep. The MDMA.
Yeah, they just shut them down for moving forward. And in some respects, I could see some of their reasoning for that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, things aren't moving as fast as we would like them to move, and they never do.
Yeah.
So, so I'm hopeful. I would really like to see that, you know, in some years to come, that people, you know, if they need an Ibogaine treatment, they would be able to get one, you know, through, because it will cost the state or society as a whole less money to treat people with Ibogaine than it will be just to let them, you know, out and about running around in addiction. But you know, how much money is available for our mental health and or just health in general? You know, look at the system you got in the
Yeah.
States. You know, ours is a little bit better because, you know, we've got socialized medicine, but still,
Yeah.
you know,
It's bleak.
yeah, 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 it's taken its time. A friend of mine is working with somebody with the MDMA soon, or has just done through. We have a system in Canada where people can access. It's a
Mm-hmm.
special access program, and so somebody has just accessed that through MDMA through a special access program in Canada. You know, but people are still. Somebody was given special access for depression with psilocybin the other day, and
Mm-hmm.
apparently that was a bit of a game changer. They had been giving it to people with end of life, you
Yeah.
know, so now that you don't have to be dying in order to try, they're fucking ridiculous. And then we've got all of these mushroom dispensaries downtown, you know. So, and that's the cannabis was legalized in
Right.
Canada. Is that Health Canada said, "Oh, okay, we're going to give you permission to use cannabis. We're not going to tell you where to get it from, but we're going to go ahead and say you can use it." You know, and the Health Canada came up with some medical cannabis, which is just garbage, and nobody would ever use it. You know, so that wasn't viable, and eventually, you know, so they're doing the same now, like, oh yeah, we'll give you permission to use MDMA. We don't know where the fuck you're going to get it from, but you go ahead and do that with your nurse practitioner friend, you know. And the same with the psilocybin, you know. So, yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting times, and I do see a lot of people in institution, like higher learning, starting to embrace it on some level. Like you're beginning to see a lot more acceptance of people writing papers about ideas. And if that is some sort of a green shoot, I know that Abigail Calder is out there, and Luigi Espaciano and Dr. Sebastian Schultz. Like there's so many people out there that are beginning to gain some traction with some of the ideas that they're putting out there. And I think that that could spawn the next generation. If we open up the door a little bit, someone may be curious and poke their head through and start the trickle
Well,
in.
there's trials going on at the moment.
Yes.
My friend is working on some trials in the UK, and there was an Ibogaine trial, a 5-MeO trial. So there's stuff going on,
Yeah.
And I don't think there's quite the money that there was a couple of years ago. Do you know what I mean? And so, then not everybody's not getting excited about it in the same way as that they were. But and then also it gets very expensive when you get pharmaceutical companies involved in trials and things like that. I think it costs like $1 billion to bring a drug to market, which is a lot of money.
Yeah, and you're talking about a cure.
And for things like something like Ibogaine, it's going to be a long time before that happens. For a start, people aren't very concerned really about people with drug problems.
Yeah, good point.
Ibogaine's more likely to come about through Parkinson's and stuff like that. I feel, which people we could be more likely to want to see the development of a drug for something like Parkinson's instead of a development of a drug for people with a drug problem.
Maybe dementia. I think Beckley or Adam Tapp had a really good article on about 5-MeO DMT and dementia, and all of a sudden that could open the door right back up, and we start talking about longevity.
But if it's connecting with the divine, I don't know if the shareholders are going to. Oh my God, we got to throw our money on that one.
Yeah, that's interesting. How there seems to be, an odd relationship between, almost an adversarial relationship between spirituality and medicine. Like there was this wedge that was driven in there. Like, we're not going to talk about this. Okay. You can have the medicine, but you can't have that. That seems to be like, pushing on each other a little bit.
Yeah. Well, that's the medical system. It doesn't really recognize that side of things. But that might be the reason why you're depressed.
Imagine that.
But they can't define that stuff.
You can't manage what you can't
measure.
I mean?
And that's another problem with psychedelics, is that they don't like this. They like to keep things in a box like this, and don't like it when it goes boom like that, because they can't write data about that. They can't. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. How do you create a supply chain around that? What do you mean we're wrong? All the stuff we said was wrong. What do you mean? Shut that down now.
Yeah. So, interesting.
I do. I think it's inevitable. And that is what gives me hope, is that, when we see Christians in Arkansas beginning to open the door to psychedelics in their church, like that to me is like, look at this coming in over here.
Well, that happened with Santo Daime, right?
Yeah, Dr.
And that was Judge Roberts.
Okay.
Who was a Bush appointee that allowed that to happen. So, yes. I mean, that is. And then, I would want to see that. I wouldn't want all of these compounds to be just taken over by the medical establishment.
Right.
Because that hasn't been. And then suddenly they come marching along and, oh, now we've found use for these.
Yes.
And therefore, they are ours. And everybody, if they want to take these, has to come through a doctor, and
right,
which will be a bit of a disaster. And so I don't want to see that the medical or the psychedelic scene kind of being hijacked by the medical establishment. So how is it going to work out otherwise? It's an interesting situation. How they'll maybe allow the holistic use of these medicines in some areas, because that's what John Roberts did. Is he allowed Santo Daime to be using using that in their religious, religious freedom is the reasons for that, So there should be something along the same lines. But how to do that, I don't know. We're trying to replace this archaic, harmful drug war that most people pay no attention to anyhow. I certainly never have.
Yeah.
And so, what's it going to be replaced with? And what's the general public going to allow it to be replaced with? Like, we have all these mushroom dispensaries downtown now. And some years ago, before we had any bricks and mortar mushroom dispensaries, Dana Larson, a long-time activist in Vancouver for cannabis and now psychedelics, said that he had an online dispensary, and he said somewhere publicly that he was going to have a bricks and mortar store downtown. And so one of the city councillors got wind of this and then wanted to have a big meeting where she would be able to ban mushroom dispensaries downtown, because she could see that there was going to be one on every street corner, kind of like we had it with cannabis before it was legalized. Now, in order to do that ban, you have to be a public meeting. And so about 100 people went down there saying all of the pros for psilocybin. And the city council meeting was shot down, 6 in favor of dispensaries, 2 against. Well, that was some years ago, and now the city council's changed a little bit. And they said at that time that they would be happy to be working with VPD to roll out the successful storefronts for mushrooms. But mushrooms are still Schedule 1 in Canada. And so, and now, this is 6 or 7 years later now, I think. And now we have like 15 or more each week. There's more dispensaries, and yet they won't give them a business license. So here's the problem you can see right now. It's like the city is saying, okay, well, we're not going to shut these places down, but in the meantime, we're just going to ignore them.
Yeah.
Which does nothing towards, bringing things a little bit closer to being regulated. They'd said some years ago that they were going to do all they could with VPD to make sure that they could regulate these things. And the same thing happened with cannabis. For years, the dispensaries were unregulated. And then they legalized cannabis, pushed out most of the people that were involved in cannabis, and made it a culture over the years, illegally, but still made it a culture. And it's kind of, what are they trying to do? The same thing? What's going on? Meanwhile, as we get mushroom dispensaries, proliferate in Vancouver, well, then they're going to start opening it up in other places. And I think they are in Toronto and stuff. And so, in the meantime, the powers that be don't want to. They know that this isn't the time to be arresting people and bringing them into court, because that would just be a waste of public money. You know. But they're still not doing anything. Do you know what I mean? So what is the drug war going to be replaced with? And that's kind of interesting. To me.
I think that's some green shoots. Like when we look at that model, it kind of reminds me of Gandhi's method of, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. And on some level, if we look at cannabis, it hasn't. We can say that it's on some level, it's been difficult to monetize it in the way that Wall Street wanted to. Like that seems like a win to me. That seems like a win. Like, you can't really get your arms around it, can you?
Right.
And then here comes mycelium, and growing sort of like the mushroom a little bit. Starts right here, find some people over here, pops up a fruit over there, a fruit over here. And I'm noticing a lot of young individuals like, I'm not really going to drink anymore. I don't want to get wasted. Like I'd rather like sit around with my friends and contemplate the philosophical underpinnings of power, and like that seems to me to be like a win. And so maybe the drug war is replaced with irrelevancy. Like, wow, I'm hopeful. And that's very, maybe that's pie in the sky, but I can see those green shoots happening. And maybe that's contagious in some ways. I'm hopeful,
Yeah.
anyways. Is that too
Yeah, it's
Pollyanna?
interesting. Yeah, well, I read an article the other day that said that in the States, on a certain day, like last month or something, more people consume cannabis than alcohol.
Yeah, that's a
I
win.
mean, that's a plant with an agenda.
Yeah, I
So
agree.
we're seeing I guess, well, and that's why we had drug decriminalization. One of the reasons why we had drug decriminalization here, I think the main reason is that you just can't arrest their way out of this situation,
Yeah.
but even with that, and so Dana, he's got 3 locations in
Nice.
Vancouver, and one of them is a coca leaf cafe, so you can go and
I
order a
love it.
coca leaf cafe instead of coffee,
Yeah.
but he's also selling LSD and DMT, 5-MeO DMT pens, which is really sticking his neck out there
Yeah.
in some respects, but not really. I mean, that's the reason why they don't want to drag him into court, because there's all of these mushroom dispensaries, or, mushrooms can get you just as altered as LSD or DMT, or, he's selling a lot
Yeah.
of microdosing kits as well for
Nice.
ACO, DMT,
Mm-hmm.
1P LSD. So he's like a one-stop
Right.
psychedelic shop. But
I love it.
if you're selling mushrooms, why shouldn't you be able to sell the other psychedelics?
Yeah.
It's like it's apples and pears at this point. So what they did with him is they arrested him the other day and threw him in jail for 8 hours. Took all of his stock in his three stores, and then let him out without charging him.
Wow.
They should know that he's not going to submit to those kind of intimidation practices. So he just went up and restocked his 3 stores and opened them up again.
That's so awesome.
And they won't drag him into court, I'm pretty sure, because it will put their drug laws on trial.
Yeah.
And with the kind of support he would get in Vancouver as well, they did the same thing with oil in Britain. There's an activist who publicly gave oil to a woman who needed it for her child for seizures. And this was done publicly in somewhere, an important place in London, and in front of the press. And as soon as he handed it over, the authorities handcuffed him and charged him. But no, sorry, they arrested him, took him down to the station. But until this day, they still haven't charged him. Again, because it's that's putting their drug laws on charge or on trial. But since that kind of display of public disobedience, now there is medical cannabis in the UK. Not in the ways we'd probably want to see it, but people do have access in some cases. So,
So
we're at a very strange time at the moment.
it is transitional. I think. When I look in the U.S., I see a lot of like the Psychedelic Lawyers Guild, and there's all these professional agencies sort of kind of coming up around this. And when I think about that, I think about the way language is changing. And people who find themselves in an altered state of awareness through breath work or psychedelics, they often find themselves bumping up against the ineffable, or they find themselves seeing themselves in a different way. But ultimately, I think it comes back to this idea of language. And what if we tie this all together with some of the kids doing projects about the effects of psychedelics on the brain, and instead of beginning to see plant medicine or psychedelics or these compounds, what if we were able to change their qualification or their classification to exogenous neurotransmitters? Now all of a sudden we're getting into the realm of like, oh, this is a neurotransmitter. I see. How can that be illegal? So on some level, it could be a semantic sort of realization. Oh, we just got to change the language here.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that there's stops there, but I think there's something there, right?
Yeah, I think entheogen helped with that.
Yes, agreed.
But it's not. It's not.
It's not a silver
Still
bullet.
leaves it a little bit ambiguous, doesn't
Right.
it?
Yeah.
So yeah, and again, like the establishment can't really say, "Oh, God, the God within," Yeah, great. What does that mean exactly? Yeah, no, you're right. I think more of a term like that would be
Yes.
beneficial. It
Right.
would. So if we look at things a little bit more scientifically, and
Yeah.
because it's coming out of the realm of indigenous and hippie use now,
Yeah.
which would both be kind of frowned upon by the powers that be, but yeah, no, I think you're right, and there's going to be a lot of little baby steps
Yes.
to getting us to where we would like to be with this situation,
And if we look at the models of cannabis, like we've gone from, oh, my uncle scored this white widow to I like the terpene profile. There's a real maturity process there that allows people to, that kind of language allows you to use in a different way. You have to have the linguistic pathway in order to thoroughly understand the environment, right? Like I can't tell you about the trail unless I tell you, oh, you go at the 4-mile marker, there's a yellow ribbon and there's like a sequoia tree right there. That's where you're gonna make your left at. We need that same sort of language for the psychedelic environment. And I think it's happening. Like just in this conversation alone, I think we've covered some fascinating topics that can give people, something to chew on in some way.
Yeah, but interesting times, like where is it going to go? And and they seem to be having a harder time in the States. Like I think Australia has now legalized medical use of MDMA.
Yeah.
So, which is stepping out before the US. So.
And how long can you deny positive results? I mean, there's people that do it their whole life. I get it. I've done it for a big part of my life, but at some level, society has to start seeing like, you know what?
But they're still dragging their feet. Like the whole thing with the FDA and MDMA, like fuck. I mean, it's the veterans. And because that seems to me that would be the easy way in to deal with the veterans or frontline workers. With paramedics and the cops and what have you. I would have thought that would have been the easy way in with that population, but still, no. So it's time as well. I because things have changed over this last period of time, and so last time I was at my dentist's office, I was looking up watching the screen, and they were talking about ketamine infusions. So yeah.
I love it. I got here's another question that comes in from my incredible audience. To all my audience, thank you for putting some questions over here and hanging out with us today. And this one actually has to do with language. What is the role of language in interpreting and integrating the profound insights gained from the altered states of consciousness?
Oh, a difficult one. That's a very individual thing.
Of course,
because integration is a very individual thing from person to person, and then a lot of the stuff that we might experience might be ineffable. Especially when we're working with things like 5-MeO, you can't describe that. You can't put that into words. That's why ineffable comes up so often. So what was the question again?
It was the role of language in interpreting and integrating the insights gained. I guess that's kind of integration. Is there symbols in there itself,
Well, it's kind of, in some ways, what you're doing in integrating is metabolizing.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
You're metabolizing the experience. And often that's done in ways that can't really be put into words exactly. I think it's more of a heartfelt or felt you know, in some ways. I'm
Yeah.
just thinking more of 5-MeO because that's so profound,
Yeah.
and 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 trying to integrate that experience, integrate and putting language to something that can't really, I mean, we
Yeah.
use words like oceanic boundlessness and stuff like that to make pathetic attempts of trying to describe what that experience can be, you know.
Maybe that's part of the healing, is trying to think of a word that can describe the experience, right? Like that sounds like you're desperately trying to form a new pathway. Like that. Maybe that's part of the work, is that contemplation.
Yeah, yeah, and sitting with that
Yeah.
afterwards instead of being distracted on our phones.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point. That's the neural net instead of the internet.
Yeah, yes, yeah. Well, and that takes away from people's integration,
Mm.
our busy lives and these things
Yep.
and stuff. So,
Yeah, I agree. What else do I got here?
but the more that somebody could do to metabolize the
I like that.
experience, yeah.
What are some techniques and some ways in which you have found to help people metabolize?
Well, the first ones, I guess, the first thing that we do with people, I encourage people to journal
Right.
after a 5-MeO DMT experience or with their Ibogaine experience. Journaling can be good, but not everybody's into that.
Yeah.
Guys aren't particularly good at journaling. I'm useless at it. So art, but immediately what we do is nature.
Mm.
After a session, that's the first thing that we normally do. After somebody's had a period of time that they might want to do some journaling and stuff, we generally have a bite to eat because people have been fasting. And
Yeah.
then the first thing that we do is we go to the forest. And so we feel that nature is a big part of that integration. But there's lots of different techniques that people can do for integration. In some ways, that integration is like a Polaroid snapshot
Mm.
that somebody takes, and it takes a while for that to develop. You remember when we used to get Polaroid, we used to wave them around in the air,
Yeah.
and then slowly that picture develops, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of things that people can do along the way to help that picture developing. But a lot of other techniques, mindfulness, but nature and being in nature and not on your phone,
Mm-hmm.
because that's when material can come up into people's field of consciousness. There's too many things in our world these days that takes us away from that. So before doing medicine work, we encourage people to disconnect as
Yeah.
much as they can, and then afterwards as well, and take time before re-entry. We encourage, if people come and do work with us for Ibogaine, if it's for drug detox, then we encourage them to go off to do some kind of aftercare like Inscape or something like that. But if people are coming for 5-MeO, then we would encourage them to take 3 to 7 days off afterwards, and to be able to sit with the experience and not be on their phones, and spend time with themselves. So we encourage people to get an Airbnb if that can be something that people can do, or create some kind of something before they step back into the real world. That's the period of time that you have to take that huge experience, and try to metabolize it
Yeah.
before going back into life. And that's often where a lot of the work is, of real work, is of being able to give yourself that time to not be distracted, to spend some time journaling, doing some art, different
Yeah.
things
That
people can
that
do. or working with a therapist as well,
Mm.
an integration specialist. We generally hook our people up with integration specialists.
Is there a process for that? Do you match certain individuals with certain therapists?
Yeah, I've got a general idea of who that might fit well for people, and then introduce them that way. Yeah, we've got a few people in our back pockets.
Yeah.
So yeah,
It's
which could
interesting.
be an even longer process. Like a
Sure.
lot of our Ibogaine people connect with my friend from the Ibogaine counseling services, Anders BT. So there might be a lot of sessions afterwards. Depending, everybody's process is different. Depending, what they've been coming from, who they are, what's been going on in their lives. Some people need more support afterwards than other people do. So it's quite an individual kind of basis. But we still encourage people to put as much as they can into an integration process afterwards, instead of like, oh, I'm just going to come and take this drug, and like I say, which can be just like peak experiences that people return to
Yeah.
on a regular basis, as opposed to not gleaning as much as they could out of their psychedelic experience, and that's doing the work afterwards.
Gareth, do you ever get the feeling that like sometimes maybe that the plant medicine works by finding an individual that's been through experiences, teaching them, and then they teach someone else? Maybe that's just the way health works on some level. Like we have turned the instrument into an institution of health. And I'm for doctors and health and people that have
Sure.
accidents. It's a wonderful thing. But
Yeah.
on some level, it just seems that maybe there's a lot of other modalities where, like what you're doing, like maybe that is just an alternative form of healthcare that people, they say the teacher shows up when you need them. Maybe you are the teacher that shows up for a lot of people. You think that could just be the way it works?
Well, I feel that what's happening is that when people engage with the medicine, like what we're really doing is showing them a door and helping them
Right.
walk through it. Like, because we don't do the medicine ourselves, that's it.
Right.
They're the ones that are doing the
Right.
Ibogaine. They're the
Right.
ones that are going through that full release experience.
Right.
So, in some ways, it's kind of like the medicine, through help with others, is really
Mm-hmm.
helping people to heal themselves in a certain way,
Yeah.
and then that knowledge can be passed on to the next person, and can also aid, like, people that we work with talk to the people that we are going to be working with, and explain to them how that process worked for them, what was good and what wasn't, or the pitfalls, or
Yeah.
but especially when we're working in addiction,
Yeah.
that can be and so people do need support coming through that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's there can be a lot of advice given and stuff, but everybody's process is a little bit different, and people recover in their own ways, at their own speed as well. So and with working with Ibogaine as well, a lot of people have been trying to get out of addiction for a long time, and so, and this kind of is in some ways giving them a roadmap,
Right.
if you will, with the aid of the medicines,
Yeah.
plant medicine, and other help along the way. But it's a kind of an individual path that people are walking. So, yeah.
It's interesting. What about the idea that, have you ever, sometimes I think about the idea that maybe addiction is a sort of malady on the way to becoming a better species, and enough of us have to go through it. There's this thing that happens when one of us does something, someone else learns. Like no one could run a 4-minute mile until one guy did it. But then
Sure.
more people did it. Now more people can do it. Maybe
Yeah.
addiction is a thing that we have to go through as a species in order to get to the next level. And we're in the midst of it here. And people are learning. They're getting better at it. We're finding ways. And maybe it becomes a malady of the past on some level. Do you ever see it on like that cosmic level?
I'm not sure. It's all part of the human experience, because like we're all addicted to a certain level.
Totally.
Like as a species, we're addicted to oil.
We addict.
And we know that it's having a severe detriment to us as a species, and yet we're still engaged in it. And some people are actively fighting against alternatives. I don't know. I don't think we come into this world to experience wholesomeness and love and all of that connectedness. I think that it's something that you work towards as, because I was horribly disconnected and drug addicted at one point in my life, and I'm not now. And it's that journey of coming back to wholesomeness, which has its own rewards. So I'm not too sure about that one. It seems to affect us on a lot of different levels, and it's some very, very detrimental. So I don't know. We're comfort seeking creatures. So that's a bit of a problem, and we've become quite addicted to our comfort, compared to how we used to live. But again, to our species' detriment, or to our children's detriment, So I don't know. It's a tricky one. That, like, if I had to do the whole thing again, I would probably still do it the way I did it, because of the importance it was to me. I wouldn't be able to do what I do now if I hadn't gone through that. So, and I wouldn't be the person that I am now if I hadn't gone through that, and had the same compassion for people and stuff because of experiencing that ourselves. So, and as horrible as it was as I was going through it, and I didn't really get out of addiction until I was 35. But again, like, I wouldn't be who I am now without that. So, it's an interesting time. And society has gone through bad times of addiction as well. I think that they clamped down on opiates very heavily at one stage, is because there were so many people addicted to opiates. You used to be able to get heroin at this corner store. That's produced by Bayer. So, and then alcohol has been a big part of our human history. In Britain, with the gin and everything, a lot of poor people were very addicted to gin. It's always been something that's been there for and drinking beer was always a very working class thing, which was, just helps people with being fucking working class.
Totally.
At the end of the day, that's so, maybe some of our addictions might be less detrimental as we wise up a little bit as a species. Maybe AI will be producing drugs for us that won't have so many detrimental effects in the future. So I don't know. It's difficult to say. As long as we are pleasure-seeking creatures, which we are, and I think it's always going to be a problem for us. And we learn the hard way on an individual basis. So, but as a society as a whole, I don't know. Things are getting better when we say that. In some respects, when more people consume cannabis than they did alcohol in the US last month or something or other. So we're seeing a little bit of a shift there. I think the addiction is a lot more in our face now since crack and
fentanyl.
Now crystal meth and fentanyl. It's a much more visible thing, which therefore is making people in society a lot more aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
And addiction's always been a problem, but I think it was not something that was seen as much. We've always had a drug problem in the downtown east side there, but now it's really out of hand. But part of that is all of the money that people have made on housing, which has made housing like this commodity that a lot of people can't have. So
Yeah. I live in Hawaii and I see there are so many new towers going up. And it blows my mind to see how much building is going on and how many homeless people there are. And then you start realizing, housing is the new art market. It's a phenomenal way to wash money. And you have sovereign wealth funds just buying like $50 million condos that are going to sit empty. And you're like, oh, I see. This is just and it's probably all drug money. It's so crazy to see the connection.
Miami was built that way.
Yeah.
That's how it was built up, with cocaine money.
Right.
And a lot of money, the building that happened here was also foreign investment. And well, now they brought in some laws about owning property, that you can't just own it and just rent it.
Right.
So you can, but you have to pay a tax on that.
Right.
Which they're gonna do, spend on housing. I don't know. I know it's almost like we're consuming ourselves in this drive for growth.
Yeah, the Ouroboros. Right?
Yeah, and so the housing situation, the drug situation. In some ways, as you look at it from the outside, could be, viewed as the downfall of the West, in some respects. So things are certainly changing, that's for certain.
Yeah.
As society as a whole.
Do you think values are changing?
Well, people seem to be more money orientated, or maybe they've always just been like that. But there seems to be a lot more inequality, and people don't really want to pay taxes or a certain percentage of, or it seems like the super wealthy are not being taxed in the ways that they used to be, and so to the detriment of everybody else. Like when you're a billionaire, how many more billions do you need?
You need all of them.
That's ridiculous,
right?
And so, but now they're not getting taxed in the same ways that they used to. Therefore, society doesn't have the same kind of money, But there seems to be a drive against social benefits and things like that, Or they call it communism, or So I don't know. I feel that we will look more and more like South America every day. I went to Colombia a long time ago when I was young, like 12, and the inequalities seem to be very glaring. And it seems to be something that we're seeing more and more of now. Like you say, these towers are going up. In Vancouver, there's more Lamborghinis and Maseratis than there ever were, but there's more people on the street.
Yeah.
And they contain it in a certain area in Vancouver because, the rest of Vancouver doesn't want to see that.
Yeah. There's a really, Marshall McLuhan in his book talked about digital feudalism, and we've spoken quite a bit about the phone and the way in which technology is making people addicted to the consumer ideologies versus, and it does seem like there's a war between consumerism and creativeness. And maybe the natural state of capital is to coalesce at the top. When you start looking at third world countries, or you look at even in the West now, like you just see two classes. We're moving from a class system back to a caste system.
Yeah. Like I said, it's looking more and more like Brazil. Where you've got the super wealthy and the super poor, and seems like the middle class is being kind of taken out.
Yeah, I think
slowly,
purposely.
you know. Well, it seems to have been happening since I left school,
Hmm.
which is, the Reagan and Thatcher era, and
Yeah.
that neoliberalism, and a lot of uh, the medical system has changed. A lot of people now that are out on the streets would have been in some kind of institution, they've been institutionalized in some way or form. And now, instead of nurses taking or looking out for those people, they're just out on the streets in places like the downtown east side, where
Right.
it's mental health issues, which we just don't care about anymore, and then the drugs, which are now cheaper and more available than they ever have been.
Yeah.
So their system, it just doesn't, it seems to be failing, you know. So in that
Yeah.
respect. So in that way, it seems society has just gotten meaner,
Mm.
and like if people have the ability to make it to the top, then they want to do that faster and want to have more. It's all about more, more, more. We idolize, wealthy people, but Forbes magazine and stuff like that's just bullshit. I just kind of, but that's just kind of that's the society that we live in.
Yeah.
We idolize this, we idolize success and the people like Trump and stuff, or half the population of the country does, or it
You
would
know,
seem.
there was a good quote that said, in a society that is sick, the most well-adjusted people are probably the sickest. Like, this
Well,
is
that's the
great. Look
position we
around.
find ourselves in.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I know. Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Gareth, the conversation, I love it, man. It's so fun to get to talk to you. And I really respect what you're doing. I'm super thankful for the work that you've done. And I think you have a really unique way of helping people find out how to become the best versions of themselves. And I'm always excited to learn about that. And I just want to say thanks on behalf of me. And I know a lot of the people in my audience are thankful for that, man. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. But they're the ones that come and do the hard work.
Yeah, it's true. That's true. That's true. They
And
have to have the courage
I
to do
always
it.
try and emphasize that,
Yeah.
people say, "Oh, thanks for, helping me," and I'm like, "Well, it's not really a helping situation.
Right.
We're giving you the opportunity to help yourself, and that's
I like
kind
that.
of, because they're the ones that come and do all the hard work. So, yeah, but we've created a place where we can set the stage for that, and yeah, once I found a way that I could do that, then you just want to pass that on
Yeah.
and make sure that people do have that opportunity. It's a bit difficult being here in our in the way that we are, but because we're in Vancouver, we can still operate, and in some ways, due to the kind of level of civil disobedience that goes on around here, it started with cannabis, and
Yep.
now there's a lot of people doing plant medicine work here. There's a lot of therapists doing work. They've been trained through TheraSil and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of people stepping out and doing the work. And because we're on the west coast of the Americas, that's where people have been doing it forever.
Yeah.
We're just kind of carrying on with a bit of a tradition, really, here, I think. So, yeah.
I like it. Opportunity.
Thank
It's
you.
a great way to help people.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Good, thanks.
Yeah. Where can people find you, and what do you got coming up? What are you excited about?
Well, oddly enough, somebody reached out to me earlier on and said that they're looking for people to help bring gain to a band one of the street songs. So I had a conversation with somebody this morning about that, and that might be where I begin to get its recognition. Some weird place like Afghanistan. So interesting things coming up. I've just come back from Mexico. I was just down there helping at a 5-MeO DMT retreat. That's something that we're trying to spend more time doing, working with that molecule. But people can find us just through a search of Inner Realms Center, all one word, innerrealmscenter.com, or Inner Realms Vancouver. Then we can come up with a pretty easy Google search. So yeah, we can be found that way.
Awesome. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did, and I hope that you all have a beautiful day. And I hope you take some time to maybe spend some time alone and think about what you want out of life and how to get it and how to nurture better relationships. Go down to the show notes, check out Garyth, and thanks for tuning into the True Life podcast. Garyth, hang on briefly afterwards, but to everybody who hung out with us today, thank you so much for being here. That's all we got. Aloha.